She stood on that train platform like a monument to broken promises, her trunk at her feet and nowhere to go. The man who'd written those sweet letters, who'd sworn to cherish her, had taken one look at her body and vanished into the crowd. Now the whole town was staring, waiting to see if the fat bride would cry. But Lila Pembroke had cried her last tear years ago, and today, this godforsaken day, she'd either collapse or choose to live. What happened next would change everything, because sometimes the wrong man leaving makes room for the right one to stay. If you're drawn to stories about second chances and love that sees past the surface, stay with me until the end. Comment below with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The afternoon sun hammered down on Cutter's Ridge like a blacksmith working iron, turning the train platform into a skillet that baked everything on it. Wooden planks, rusted nails, and one very still woman who refused to move even as sweat traced lines down her temples. Lila Pembroke stood exactly where she'd been standing for the past 40 minutes, her gloved hands folded across the waist of her best traveling dress, the blue one with ivory buttons that she'd spent 3 months sewing by candlelight in her sister's attic back in Philadelphia. Her trunk sat beside her, rope-bound and sturdy, containing everything she owned in the world. 6 dresses, 2 pairs of shoes, her mother's Bible, a bundle of letters tied with kitchen twine. Those letters. She should have burned them the moment she'd arrived and seen his face change. Should have known from the way his eyes went wide, then narrow, then cold as January creek water. Should have recognized the particular species of coward that lived in Victor Hale's bones, the kind that could write poetry about forever, but couldn't stand still long enough to say goodbye. "Ma'am?" The station clerk appeared at her elbow for the 3rd time, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "Ma'am, we're closing up in an hour. You got someone coming for you?" Lila turned her head slowly, meeting his gaze with eyes the color of creek stone. "I was told someone would be here." It wasn't quite a lie. Victor had told her he'd be here, had written it in his last letter, the one that had arrived 3 weeks ago with a pressed wildflower and promises of a little house with a garden, 2-bedroom for the children they'd have, and a life that would erase every cruel word anyone had ever spoken about her body. "My dearest Lila," he'd written in that slanted script she'd memorized, "I count the days until you arrive. You'll be the making of me. I know it. Whatever you've been told about yourself, forget it. Here, you'll be cherished." The station clerk shifted his weight. "It's just, folks are starting to talk." "Let them." And they were talking. Lila could feel it like heat shimmer rising off the platform, could sense the way eyes tracked her from the general store across the street, from the saloon 2 doors down, from the small clusters of women who'd found reasons to linger near the platform, their baskets full of nothing much, their mouths full of words they thought she couldn't hear. Poor thing. Came all this way. Well, you can see why he'd... Hush now, she'll hear. Does it matter? Look at her, she knows. Lila's jaw tightened, but she didn't move. Didn't turn. Didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She'd been the fat girl at every dance, the one boys accepted bets to talk to, the one mothers steered their sons away from with sympathetic smiles that cut deeper than any insult. She'd heard every variation of cruel the human mouth could produce. These frontier gossips would have to try harder. A wagon rattled up to the platform, and Lila's heart did something complicated. Half hope, half dread. But it wasn't Victor. It was a lean, sun-weathered man in his middle 30s, with a face that looked like it had forgotten how to rest, and eyes that carried the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. 2 boys sat in the wagon bed behind him, maybe 7 and 9 years old, both watching everything with the wary stillness of young animals. The man set the brake and climbed down, moving like someone whose body had learned to expect pain. He nodded to the station clerk. "Afternoon, Pete." "Grant." The clerk's relief was audible. "You here for someone?" "My sister-in-law, trained from Cheyenne." The man called Grant scanned the platform, his gaze passing over Lila without pausing. "She on board?" "Came in 2 hours back. Nobody left on it now, but..." The clerk's voice dropped, but not enough. "But the Hale situation." Grant's attention swung back to Lila, and this time his eyes stayed. He studied her the way a man might study a broken fence line, assessing, calculating, taking measure. Lila lifted her chin and stared back. She was done shrinking. "You're waiting for Victor Hale," Grant said. It wasn't a question. "I was." "He ain't coming." I gathered that. Something shifted in Grant's expression. Not quite sympathy, not quite approval, but something in between. He glanced at the clerk. "Victor come through at all today?" "Saw him this morning at the hotel. He was having breakfast with the Carson widow." The words hung in the air like gunsmoke. Lila's hands tightened on her bag, her knuckles going white beneath the fabric of her gloves. But her voice came out level. "I see." "Ma'am," Grant said quietly, "I don't mean to speak out of turn, but if you're stranded, there's a boarding house 2 streets over. Mrs. Chen runs a decent place. Clean rooms, fair prices. I have $4. That'll get you through the week. And then?" Grant hesitated. The older boy in the wagon, the one with his father's serious eyes, leaned forward slightly, listening. The younger one picked at a splinter in the wagon rail, but his attention was locked on the adults too. "There's work," Grant said finally. "If you're not afraid of it." "I've never been afraid of work." Lila's voice carried an edge now. "I'm a fair hand with sewing, decent with cooking, can manage a garden, and handle chickens. I can read and write and do sums. I came here to be a wife, but I'm not fool enough to think that's my only option." A wife. Grant said the word carefully, like he was testing its weight. That's what the advertisement said. That's what the letters promised. Lila's composure cracked just slightly, just enough to let some of the fury through. "I sold everything I had for the train ticket. Left the only family I have because a man I'd never met wrote words pretty enough to make me believe them. So yes, Mr. Holloway. Grant Holloway. So yes, Mr. Holloway. I came here to be a wife. I came here to build something that mattered. And I understand that I'm not what was expected, that my body doesn't match whatever picture he had in his fool head, but I am—" She stopped, pulling air through her nose, steadying herself. "I am here, and I'm not going back." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the wind pushing dust across the platform and the creak of the wagon as one of the boys shifted position. Grant cleared his throat. "Mrs. Holloway, my wife, Sarah, she passed 18 months back. Fever took her in 3 days." His voice was rough, like speaking the words scoured his throat. "The boys need someone who'll stay, who'll show up every morning and be there every night. I need someone who can help me hold this farm together before it falls apart around our ears." Lila's breath caught. "Mr. Holloway, I'm not Victor Hale. I can't write pretty letters. I got a homestead 7 miles out with more work than hours in the day, a house that needs a woman's hand, and 2 boys who've forgotten what it feels like to be looked after proper. I can offer you a roof, 3 meals, and honest work. I can offer you my name, if you want it, and a place in my home. What I can't offer is romance or soft words or any kind of easy life. You're asking me to marry you." The words came out flat, disbelieving. "I'm asking if you'd rather be Mrs. Holloway with a purpose, or stranded in Cutter's Ridge with $4 and no prospects." The station clerk made a small sound of shock. The boys in the wagon had gone absolutely still. Somewhere across the street, one of the gossiping women gasped loud enough to carry. Lila looked at Grant Holloway, really looked at him, saw the lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into too many sunrises, the calluses on his hands that meant he knew the meaning of hard labor, the set of his shoulders that suggested he carried more than his share of weight. Saw the way he stood square to her, not angling away like most men did when they realized her size, not letting his gaze drift to safer territory. "What about love?" she asked. "What about it? Don't you want it?" Grant's expression didn't change. "Ma'am, I wanted my wife back, wanted my boys to have their mother, wanted to wake up in a world where good people don't die for no reason. Wanting don't change what is. What I got is a farm that needs running and 2 boys who need raising. If there's room for love in that, well—" He shrugged, the gesture tired and honest. "We'll find out together." Lila studied him for another long moment, her mind racing through options like fingers through coins, counting up what she had and what she needed. $4. No family within 1,000 miles. No job. No prospects. No man coming to save her because the man who'd promised to had run the moment he'd seen her. But here was a man who wasn't running. Here was a man offering her something real. "I'll want my own room," she said. "You can have the bedroom. I'll take the loft with the boys. I'll want to keep my own name too, Lila Pembroke Holloway." "Fair enough. And if it doesn't work, if I'm not what you need or you're not what I need, I'll want the freedom to leave. I'll drive you to the station myself." Lila nodded slowly. Then she held out her hand. "All right, Mr. Holloway. I'll marry you." Grant took her hand. His palm was warm and rough, his grip firm but not crushing. "We should do it today." "Today? No point waiting. We got a preacher, we got witnesses, and the sooner you're legally Mrs. Holloway, the sooner Victor Hale's got no claim to bother you." He wasn't wrong. Lila glanced down at her traveling dress, at the dust on her hem, and the wrinkles from hours of sitting on a train. This wasn't how she'd imagined her wedding day. Then again, nothing about this day had gone according to any plan. "All right," she said again. "Today." Grant turned to the boys. "Samuel, Thomas, come on down and meet Miss Pembroke. She's going to be your new ma." The boys climbed down from the wagon with the slow, uncertain movements of children who'd learned that change usually meant loss. Samuel, the older one, had his father's eyes and a serious set to his mouth. Thomas was smaller, darker, with a dusting of freckles and a way of standing half behind his brother. "Ma'am," Samuel said, offering a small, awkward bow. "Hello, Samuel. Hello, Thomas." Lila smiled, the expression feeling strange on her face after hours of holding herself so rigid. "I hope we'll be friends." Thomas peeked around Samuel's shoulder but didn't speak. Samuel studied her with an intensity that reminded her painfully of his father. "You gonna stay?" "That's the plan." Ma used to say lots of things were the plan. "Samuel," Grant's voice carried a warning. "It's all right," Lila said softly. She crouched down, bringing herself closer to the boy's level, her skirts pooling around her. "Your mother was right to teach you that plans change, but I'm making you a different kind of promise. I promise that I'll show up. Every day, I'll be there. I'll learn what you like for breakfast, and I'll remember how you take your eggs. I'll mend your clothes when they tear, and I'll teach you your letters if you don't know them. I can't promise that nothing will ever change again because that's not how life works. But I promise I won't leave on purpose. Is that enough?" Samuel considered this with the gravity of a circuit judge. Finally, he nodded. "I reckon it'll do." Thomas stepped out from behind his brother and looked up at Lila with eyes that were too old for his face. "Can you cook?" "Yes." "Better than Pa?" "Thomas," Grant said, but there was the faintest hint of something that might have been humor in his voice. Lila smiled. "I guess you'll have to let me know." The ride to the church took 15 minutes through streets that seemed to empty ahead of them, people ducking into shops and doorways to watch them pass. Lila sat on the wagon seat beside Grant, her trunk secured in the back beside two boys who kept sneaking glances at her like she might vanish if they looked away. The church was a small wooden building with a crooked cross and windows that didn't quite close all the way. The preacher was a round man with kind eyes and hands that shook slightly when he opened his Bible. "This is irregular," he said, looking from Grant to Lila and back again. "Life's irregular, Reverend." Grant kept his hat in his hands. "Can you marry us or not?" "I can, but Grant, are you certain? You've known this woman for less than an hour." "I'm certain I need a wife and she needs a husband. That's certain enough." The Reverend turned to Lila. "Miss Pembroke, soon to be Holloway. Miss Pembroke, marriage is a sacred covenant. It's not something to enter into lightly, especially under these circumstances. If you need time to think, to pray about this decision—" "Reverend," Lila interrupted gently, "I spent 6 months thinking and praying about coming to Cutter's Ridge. I prayed for a good man, an honest life, and a chance to matter to someone. Maybe I didn't imagine it would happen quite like this. But I don't think God's particular about the details as long as the heart's right. My heart's right. Is yours?" She looked at Grant. "Yes, ma'am." "Then we're wasting daylight." The Reverend sighed, but he opened his Bible. The station clerk and his wife served as witnesses, standing awkwardly near the door like they might need to make a quick exit. The boys sat in the front pew. Samuel watching everything with that serious expression. Thomas swinging his legs and studying a beetle crawling across the floor. Dearly beloved, the Reverend began, and Lila felt the words wash over her like water from a well, cold and clean and real. This was happening. This was actually happening. When it came time for vows, Grant spoke his in a voice that didn't waver. I, Grant Michael Holloway, take you, Lila Pembroke, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to provide for you, protect you, and treat you with respect as long as we both shall live. The Reverend blinked. That's not quite the traditional, it's what I can promise, Grant said. It's honest. Lila's turn. She took a breath, her hands surprisingly steady. I, Lila Marie Pembroke, take you, Grant Michael Holloway, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to keep your home, care for your sons, and stand beside you through whatever comes. I promise to stay. That'll do, the Reverend said quietly. By the power vested in me, by the territory of Wyoming, and by God Almighty, I pronounce you husband and wife. Grant, you may kiss your bride. Grant hesitated, and Lila saw the uncertainty flicker across his face. She made the decision for both of them, leaning up and pressing a quick, chaste kiss to his cheek. His skin was warm and rough with day-old stubble. There, she said, sealed. The ride back to the homestead took an hour, the wagon creaking and swaying over ruts in the road that had been carved by a decade of traffic. The sun was starting its slow descent, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber. Lila watched the land roll past, endless grass, scattered trees, the occasional cluster of cattle in the distance. It's beautiful, she said. Grant glanced at her, surprised. Most people say it's empty. Empty's just another word for possibility. Behind them, Thomas piped up. Pa says Ma used to say the prairie was God's rough draft, before he figured out what he was doing. Samuel elbowed his brother. Pa says we shouldn't talk about Ma to strangers. She's not a stranger, Thomas protested. She's our new Ma. She's still a stranger, Samuel insisted, but his voice held more confusion than conviction. Grant kept his eyes on the road. Boys, Mrs. Holloway knows your Ma's irreplaceable. Nobody's asking you to forget her. I'm not trying to replace anyone, Lila added softly, turning in the seat to look at them. I'm just trying to find my place. Maybe we can figure it out together. Samuel didn't respond, but Thomas nodded, and Lila counted that as a small victory. The Holloway homestead appeared on the horizon like a promise that had been kept partially, but not completely. The house was a simple two-room structure with a sagging porch and windows that needed washing. The barn leaned slightly to the left, and the chicken coop was held together more by prayer than nails. But there was a garden plot that someone had tended recently, and the fences, while worn, were intact. Grant pulled the wagon up to the house and set the brake. It's not much. It's honest, Lila said, echoing his earlier words. That's more than I had this morning. She climbed down before Grant could offer his hand, her legs stiff from the ride. The boys jumped down and immediately vanished around the side of the house, their voices carrying in the evening air. Grant hefted her trunk like it weighed nothing and carried it up the porch steps. The inside of the house was dim and smelled of wood smoke and something else, the particular scent of a place where a woman's touch had once lived but had slowly faded. There was a main room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 4 mismatched chairs, and a rocking chair with one runner worn smooth from use. Through a doorway, Lila could see a bedroom with a simple frame bed covered in quilts. That was Sarah's room, Grant said, setting the trunk down. I haven't changed much. If you want to move things around, make it your own. That's fine by me. Lila walked to the doorway and looked in. The bed was neatly made, the quilts faded but clean. There was a small table beside it with a candle stub and a tintype photograph in a simple frame, a young woman with soft eyes and a gentle smile, holding a baby. Your wife was beautiful, Lila said. She was. Grant's voice was matter-of-fact. She was also kind, patient, and better than I deserved. The boys remember her, but not as clear as they should. Samuel tries to hold on to it, but Thomas, he was only 4 when she passed. The details are slipping away from him. That must be hard. Watching your children forget their mother? Yeah, it's like losing her twice. Grant cleared his throat. I'll get the boys settled for supper. Kitchen's through there. We got beans, some salt pork, flour, eggs from the chickens. Make whatever seems right. I'll tend the animals and get the boys washed up." He left before Lila could respond, the door closing behind him with a soft thud. She stood in the middle of the main room, her city dress ridiculous in this rough-hewn space, and tried to process everything that had happened in the past 8 hours. This morning, she'd been on a train, nervous and hopeful, imagining her future with a man who'd written beautiful lies. Tonight, she was Mrs. Grant Holloway, standing in a stranger's house with 2 wary boys and a widower husband who'd married her because she was convenient. This was not the life she'd planned. But then again, plans were just another kind of lie people told themselves to feel safe. Lila took off her gloves, folded them carefully, and set them on the table. Then she rolled up her sleeves and went to find the kitchen. The kitchen was a lean-to addition off the back of the house, with a cast-iron stove that had seen better days and shelves lined with jars of preserves that Sarah Holloway must have put up before she died. Lila found the beans, the salt pork, an onion that was starting to sprout, and a jar of what looked like stewed tomatoes. She built up the fire in the stove, her hands remembering the motions from years of cooking in her sister's cramped Philadelphia kitchen. The beans went into a pot with water to soak. The salt pork got diced and fried until it was crispy. The onion went in next, then the tomatoes, then the beans with enough water to make everything tender. While the beans cooked, she mixed up biscuits, flour, a pinch of salt, lard, buttermilk she found in the cold box. Her hands worked automatically, kneading and shaping while her mind tried to catch up to her circumstances. She was married. She was a mother. She was Mrs. Lila Holloway. The absurdity of it hit her all at once, and she started laughing, quiet at first, then harder, until she had to brace herself against the counter and wipe tears from her eyes. This morning she'd been jilted. Tonight she was a wife. The sheer velocity of the change was dizzying. "Ma'am?" Lila spun around. Samuel stood in the doorway, watching her with concerned eyes. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." She wiped her face, trying to compose herself. It's been a long day. Pa says supper smells good. Tell your pa it'll be ready in 20 minutes. Samuel lingered, shifting his weight. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why'd you say yes when Pa asked you to marry him? You didn't know us. You could have just taken that boarding house room and found work somewhere. Why'd you say yes to marrying a stranger?" Lila looked at this serious boy, this child who'd already learned that the world could take away everything that mattered. She decided to give him the truth. "Because I'm tired of being alone," she said simply. "Because I came all this way to build a life, and your father offered me a way to do that. Because sometimes the safe choice is just another way of giving up, and I'm not ready to give up yet. Is that a good enough answer?" Samuel thought about this. "I reckon so. Can I ask you something?" He nodded. "Why'd your father say yes? He could have just pointed me toward Mrs. Chen's boarding house and gone on with his life. Why marry me?" "Because we're drowning," Samuel said bluntly. "Pa works from can see to can't see, and it's still not enough. The crops need tending, and the animals need feeding, and Thomas is running half wild because nobody's got time to watch him proper. Ma kept everything together, and when she died, it all started falling apart. Pa's trying, but..." He shrugged, the gesture too adult for his age. "He needs help. We all do." "That's honest. Pa says honest's all we got. Your pa's a wise man." "He's a tired man," Samuel corrected. "There's a difference." Lila smiled despite herself. "Go tell your tired, wise pa that supper's almost ready." They ate at the rough table, beans and biscuits, and silence broken only by the scrape of spoons against bowls. The boys ate like they were starving, and Lila made a mental note to make sure breakfast was substantial. Grant ate methodically, not looking up, his focus entirely on his plate. "This is good," Thomas said finally, his mouth half full. "Thomas, manners," Grant said, but without much heat. "It's all right," Lila said. "I'm glad you like it." "It's better than Pa's cooking," Thomas continued, earning himself a look from Samuel. "What?" "It is. Your pa was keeping you fed," Lila said firmly. "That's what matters." Grant's glance up at her was brief, but held something that might have been gratitude. After supper, he sent the boys up to the loft to wash and change while he and Lila cleared the dishes. They worked in silence, the kind that wasn't quite comfortable but wasn't hostile either. "I'll sleep out here," Grant said, nodding toward the rocking chair. "Until we figure out... until things settle. The loft is full of boys. The chair's fine." Lila dried the last bowl and set it on the shelf. "Mr. Holloway." "Grant." "Grant, this arrangement. I want to make sure we're clear about expectations. I'll keep your house, care for your sons, and do my share of the work. But the marriage bed... Ma'am, I'm not expecting anything beyond what we agreed to at the church. You'll have your privacy, and I'll have mine, and we'll figure out the rest as we go." The relief that washed through her was almost painful. "Thank you." "Nothing to thank me for. I made you a promise. I intend to keep it." That night, Lila lay in Sarah Holloway's bed, staring at Sarah Holloway's ceiling, surrounded by Sarah Holloway's things. The quilt smelled faintly of lavender and wood smoke. The pillow was soft and worn in the middle. Outside, she could hear the boys' voices from the loft, murmuring to each other in the darkness. Further away, the creak of the rocking chair told her Grant was still awake. She should feel guilty, lying in a dead woman's bed, married to a dead woman's husband. But guilt required energy she didn't have. Instead, she felt only a bone-deep exhaustion and a strange, fragile sense of relief. She was here. She had a place. She had a purpose. It wasn't what she'd planned, but it was real. And real, she was learning, was enough to start with. Morning came too early, announced by a rooster with opinions and the sound of boots on wooden floors. Lila woke disoriented, her body still expecting the narrow bed in her sister's Philadelphia attic, her mind slow to remember where she was and why. Then she saw the quilts, smelled the wood smoke, heard the low rumble of Grant's voice outside, and it all came rushing back. She was married. She was a farmer's wife. She was Mrs. Holloway. She dressed quickly in the pre-dawn darkness, trading her traveling dress for a simple cotton one she'd packed, then braided her hair and pinned it up. Her reflection in the small mirror above the dresser looked the same as it always had: round face, solid shoulders, the body that had made Victor Hale run. But something in her eyes was different. Harder, maybe. Or just more awake. The main room was empty, the rocking chair pushed against the wall with a folded blanket on the seat. Through the window, she could see Grant at the well, hauling up water while the boys chased chickens across the yard. The sky was just starting to lighten, turning from black to deep blue to the pale gray that came before sunrise. Lila went to the kitchen and stoked the fire in the stove, adding wood until the flames caught and held. She found eggs in a basket by the door, milk in the cold box, the last of yesterday's biscuits wrapped in cloth. By the time Grant and the boys came in, she had breakfast on the table: scrambled eggs with bits of leftover salt pork, biscuits split and fried in butter, milk poured into 4 cups. "Morning," Grant said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. His hair was damp from the well water, combed back but already starting to dry in unruly waves. "Good morning," Lila gestured to the table. "Sit. Eat while it's hot." The boys needed no encouragement, sliding into their chairs and reaching for biscuits. Grant took his seat more slowly, his movements careful, like a man whose body hurt more than he'd admit. "You sleep all right?" he asked. "Well enough. You?" "The chair's fine." It wasn't. She could tell from the way he held his shoulders, but she didn't press. They ate in the comfortable silence of people too hungry and too tired to make conversation. Thomas hummed under his breath between bites. Samuel ate with single-minded focus, already halfway done before the rest of them were properly started. "What's the plan for today?" Lila asked. Grant wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "North fence needs mending. Been putting it off, but the cattle will wander if I don't fix it soon. Boys can help me with that." "What do you need from me?" He looked surprised by the question. "I figured you'd want time to settle in, unpack your things, get your bearings." "I can do that in an hour. What else needs doing?" Grant exchanged a glance with Samuel, something passing between them that Lila couldn't quite read. "Garden's overrun with weeds," he said finally, "and the chicken coop needs fresh straw. The milk cow's been acting temperamental, so she'll need patience. The washing's piled up something terrible, but that's a day's work." Lila finished. Maybe 2 if I'm slow about it. Which jobs are most urgent? The garden, Samuel said before his father could answer. We've been eating preserves and dried beans all winter because nothing fresh is coming up. Then I'll start there. Lila stood, collecting plates. Go on, all of you. I'll clean up and get to work. Grant hesitated. You sure? I didn't marry you to sit idle, Mr. Holloway. Grant, he corrected again, almost gentle. And thank you. After they left, Lila washed the dishes, changed into her oldest dress, and went to assess the garden. It was worse than Grant had suggested, a tangle of weeds and volunteer plants. The neat rows Sarah Holloway must have planted long since disappeared under aggressive growth. But the soil was good, dark, and rich, and the location was right, catching morning sun and afternoon shade from the house. Lila found tools in the barn, a hoe with a loose handle, a spade, a rake missing half its tines. She tied a kerchief over her hair, rolled up her sleeves, and went to work. The sun climbed higher, turning the morning cool into midday heat. Lila's back started aching within the first hour, her hands blistering despite her gloves. Sweat soaked through her dress, plastered her hair to her forehead, made her skin itch. But she kept working, pulling weeds by the handful, turning soil, clearing space for new planting. The rhythm of it was meditative: bend, pull, toss, repeat. Bend, pull, toss, repeat. She found remnants of Sarah's garden underneath the weeds. Volunteer tomatoes struggling toward sunlight, potato plants gone wild, herbs that had reseeded themselves year after year, determined to survive. Lila worked carefully around these, giving them room to breathe, pulling away the competition. Ma'am? She straightened, pressing a hand to her lower back. Thomas stood at the edge of the garden, holding a tin cup. Your pa send you? Said you'd be thirsty. He came closer, offering the cup. The water was cool and sweet, probably fresh from the well. Lila drank half of it, then poured the rest over her wrists, sighing at the relief. Thank you, Thomas. You got dirt on your face. I imagine I do. Ma used to get dirt on her face, too, when she worked the garden. He said it carefully, watching her reaction. Did she like gardening? She said it was like praying with your hands, that you put seeds in the ground and hoped God remembered to send rain. Thomas kicked at a clod of dirt. She was good at it, better than Pa. He tries, but things don't grow for him like they did for her. Maybe they'll grow for me, Lila said, or maybe I'll have to learn to be stubborn about it. Either way, we'll eat something besides beans eventually. Thomas smiled, a quick flash that transformed his serious little face. Pa says you're practical. Is that what he says? He told Samuel last night, after you went to bed, said you were practical and didn't seem afraid of work, and that was more important than romance anyway. Lila felt something twist in her chest, not quite pain, not quite relief. Your pa's probably right about that. Are you going to stay? Thomas asked suddenly. Really stay, I mean. Not just say you will and then leave when things get hard. I'm going to try my very best to stay. That's not the same as promising. No, Lila agreed. It's not. But it's honest. Is that enough? Thomas considered this with the same serious expression his brother wore so often. I guess we'll see. He left the cup with her and ran back toward the barn, where she could hear Grant's voice calling instructions about fence posts. Lila watched him go. This boy who was hers now, whether either of them fully understood what that meant, then turned back to the garden. By the time the sun reached its peak, she'd cleared half the plot and found more survivors than she'd expected. Onions, beans climbing dead corn stalks, squash vines that had spread across half the cleared space. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She was covered in dirt, her dress was ruined, and her hands were bleeding through her gloves, but the garden looked like it might remember how to be a garden again. She went inside to start on the washing, hauling water from the well in buckets that made her shoulders scream, heating it on the stove, scrubbing clothes against a washboard until her knuckles were raw. The pile was enormous. Weeks of accumulated shirts and trousers and union suits, all of it stiff with dried sweat and dirt. She worked methodically, wringing out each piece and hanging it on the line stretched between the house and the barn. The afternoon stretched long and hot. Lila moved from task to task, washing, hanging, checking the garden, feeding the chickens, attempting to make friends with the temperamental milk cow. The cow gave her a baleful look and refused to cooperate until Lila started singing an old hymn her mother used to hum while cooking. Something about the music gentled the animal, and she finally let down her milk. "You got a touch," Grant said from the barn door, making her jump. "You scared me half to death." "Sorry." He came closer, studying the pail of milk. "She hasn't let anyone but me near her since Sarah died. Gave Samuel a bruise the size of a fist when he tried. Maybe she just needed patience. Maybe she needed a woman's voice." But Grant's expression was unreadable. "You get much done today? Garden's half cleared, washing's on the line, chickens are fed, cows milked. Haven't made it to the coop yet." "Lila." He said her name carefully, like he was testing how it felt. "You don't have to do everything in one day." "I know, but I'm here, and it needs doing, so—" She shrugged, suddenly self-conscious about her filthy dress and sweaty face and bleeding hands. Grant noticed the hands, his jaw tightened. "You hurt yourself." "Just blisters. They'll callus over. Come inside. I'll wrap them." "It's not necessary." "Come inside," he repeated, and there was something in his voice that wasn't quite a command but wasn't a request either. She followed him into the house, where he pulled a tin box from a high shelf and gestured for her to sit. The box held strips of clean cloth, a brown bottle of something that smelled medicinal, and a small pot of salve. Grant took her hand, his touch gentle despite his rough palms, and examined the damage. "This'll sting," he warned, then dabbed the medicine onto her blisters before she could protest. It did sting, sharp and immediate, but Lila bit her lip and stayed still. He worked quickly, efficiently, wrapping her hands with the cloth strips and securing them with neat knots. "You do this often?" she asked. "Farm work means injuries. You learn to patch yourself up." He released her hands and started putting things back in the tin. "Sarah used to do this for me, near the end, when she was still strong enough. Said it was important to take care of the people who took care of you." "She sounds like she was a good woman." "She was." Grant closed the tin with a decisive snap. "But she's gone. And you're here, and I need you to understand something." Lila waited. "I married you because I needed help. That's true. But I didn't marry you to work yourself to death in the first week." "You pace yourself, you hear me? This farm's been here longer than both of us, and it'll be here long after. There's no race to prove yourself." "Isn't there?" The words came out sharper than she'd intended. "I'm the mail-order bride who got left at the station, Grant. I'm the fat woman you married out of convenience. Every person in Cutter's Ridge is waiting to see if I'll fail. If you'll regret this. If I'll prove them right about every cruel thing they've ever thought about people who look like me. So forgive me if I feel like I have something to prove." Grant was quiet for a long moment, his eyes steady on hers. "You think I care what Cutter's Ridge thinks? Don't you?" "I care that my sons are fed and clothed and raised right. I care that my fences are mended and my cattle don't starve. I care that when winter comes we're ready for it. What the gossips in town think about my wife." He shook his head. "That doesn't even make the list." "Easy for you to say. You've never been the fat girl at the dance." "No, but I've been the widower who couldn't keep his farm running. I've been the man who couldn't save his wife from a fever. I've been the father who watches his boys grow up too fast because he can't be both parents at once." His voice was rough, but not unkind. "We've all got something people whisper about, Lila. The trick is deciding who gets to matter." She looked down at her bandaged hands, the cloth already showing spots of red where the blisters were worst. "I don't know how to not care." "Then fake it until you learn. That's what I do." Despite everything, Lila laughed. It came out hoarse and tired, but real. "You're an odd man, Grant Holloway." "And you're an odd woman, Lila Holloway. I reckon that makes us even." He stood, putting the tin back on its shelf. "Rest a bit before you start supper. Boys won't starve if we eat late." But Lila didn't rest. She couldn't. Instead, she went back outside and finished clearing the garden as the afternoon sun slanted toward evening. Her hands throbbed inside the bandages. Her back was a solid line of pain, but she kept working until the last weed was pulled and the rows were visible again. When she finally stopped, the light was fading and she could hear the boys at the well, laughing about something. She looked at the garden, still rough, still a long way from producing anything useful, but no longer a lost cause. It looked like possibility again. That night, supper was stew made from preserved vegetables and the last of the salt pork, with fresh bread that Lila had somehow found time to bake between everything else. The boys ate hungrily, competing to see who could finish first. Grant ate more slowly, watching her across the table with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "Garden looks good," he said finally. "It'll look better once I get seeds in." "I'll take you to town Saturday. We can get what you need." Lila's hand stilled on her spoon. "I'd rather not go to town. You can't avoid it forever." "I can try." Samuel looked between them, sensing tension. "Is it because of Mr. Hale?" "Samuel," Grant warned. "What?" "Everyone knows about Mr. Hale. Jimmy Carson's ma told his pa that Mr. Hale's been telling everyone the mail-order bride was too fat, so he sent her away, and that pa married her out of pity." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Lila set down her spoon carefully, her face burning. Thomas had gone very still, watching her with wide eyes. "That true?" Samuel asked. "Did pa marry you out of pity?" "Samuel, that's enough," Grant said, his voice hard. "I'm just asking—" "I said that's enough." But Lila held up a hand. "No, it's all right. He deserves an answer." She looked at Samuel directly. "Your pa married me because he needed help, and I needed a home. That's not pity, that's practical. As for Mr. Hale, and what he's telling people, I spent my whole life listening to people say I'm too fat, too plain, too much of everything that doesn't matter, and not enough of everything that does. And you know what I learned?" Samuel shook his head. "I learned that people who judge you by your body are usually too cowardly to look any deeper. Mr. Hale wanted a pretty ornament. Your pa wanted a partner. There's a difference, and it's got nothing to do with pity." "But it is true," Samuel pressed. "About you being, about my being fat?" Lila finished for him. "Yes, Samuel, it's true. I'm fat. I've been fat my whole life, and I'll probably be fat till the day I die. And if that bothers you or your pa or anyone else, well, that's not my problem to fix." Grant's voice was quiet but carried weight. "It doesn't bother me." "And it doesn't bother me," Thomas added quickly. "Ma was thin and she died anyway, so being thin doesn't mean anything." The logic was childish but earnest, and it made Lila's throat tight. "No, sweetheart, it doesn't mean anything." Samuel was still watching her, his expression troubled. "People at school are going to talk." "Probably." "They're going to say things about you, about pa." "Probably that too." "What should I say back?" Lila considered this carefully. "You could tell them your pa's wife keeps a better house than their ma's, or that she makes better biscuits, or that she can clear a garden faster than any of their hired hands." She paused. "Or you could tell them that what happens in the Holloway house is Holloway business, and they can mind their own." Samuel's mouth quirked in something that might have been the start of a smile. "I like that last one." "Me too," Thomas said. Grant cleared his throat. "We're still going to town Saturday. You need seeds, and the boys need supplies for school. We'll hold our heads up and let people think what they want." "Easy for you to say." "No," Grant said, meeting her eyes across the table. "It's not easy at all, but it's necessary. You're a Holloway now, Lila. We don't hide." After supper, after the dishes were washed and the boys were settled in the loft, Lila sat on the porch steps and watched the stars emerge. The prairie at night was a different creature than it was by day, vast and dark and full of sounds she was still learning to identify. Crickets, a distant coyote, the wind moving through grass like breath. The door opened behind her, and Grant came out with 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one and sat beside her, not quite close enough to touch, but not quite far enough to suggest distance. "You did good today," he said. "I did what needed doing." Most people wouldn't have worked that hard on their first full day. Most people aren't trying to prove they deserve to be here. Grant sipped his coffee, looking out at the darkness. "You know what Sarah used to say?" "What?" "She said that worth isn't something you prove, it's something you are. You're born with it, like brown eyes or freckles. The only question is whether people are willing to see it. Your wife sounds like she was smarter than both of us." "She was." Grant's voice was soft. "She was smart and patient and good at seeing people for what they really were instead of what they looked like." When we got married, her parents told her she could do better, that I was just a farmer with a hardscrabble plot and no prospects. She told them she wasn't marrying prospects, she was marrying a man. They came around eventually, but it took time. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to know that I understand what it's like when people think they know better than you do about what you deserve. And I want you to know that I don't think I'm doing you a favor by marrying you. If anything, it's the other way around. Lila looked at him, at his profile silhouetted against the starlight, at the lines of exhaustion etched deep around his eyes and mouth. You mean that? I don't say things I don't mean. They sat in silence, drinking coffee and listening to the prairie breathe. After a while, Thomas's voice drifted down from the loft window above them, singing something tuneless and drowsy. Grant smiled, the expression transforming his tired face. He does that when he's almost asleep, drives Samuel crazy. He seems like a happy child. He is, or he's trying to be. Samuel remembers Sarah more clearly, so he feels the loss deeper. Thomas just knows something's missing, but he's young enough to adapt. Grant finished his coffee. They like you. How can you tell? Thomas wouldn't have brought you water if he didn't, and Samuel wouldn't have asked you those questions at supper if he wasn't trying to figure out where you fit. They're testing you, seeing if you'll stay. And you? Lila asked. Are you testing me too? Grant was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally he said, I'm trying to figure out if I'm allowed to hope this might work. If it's fair to you or the boys or even to Sarah's memory to want this to be more than just convenient. What would more look like? I don't know yet. Partnership, maybe? Respect? The kind of marriage where we're pulling together instead of just existing in the same house. He stood, taking both empty cups. But that's a question for another day. You should sleep. Tomorrow's Sunday. We'll go to church in the morning, face down the gossips, and come home. Consider it practice for Saturday. You don't make it sound appealing. It's not, but it's necessary. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, Lila, I'm glad you said yes yesterday. I know this isn't what you imagined when you got on that train, but I'm glad you're here. After he went inside, Lila sat on the porch for a long time, looking up at stars that seemed close enough to touch, and wondering what Sarah Holloway would think about the woman sleeping in her bed, wearing her life like a borrowed coat. Would she be angry, relieved? Would she understand that Lila wasn't trying to replace her, just trying to find a place to belong? The wind picked up, carrying the scent of turned earth from the garden and something else. Wildflowers, maybe, or sage. Lila pulled her shawl tighter and made herself a promise in the darkness. She would make this work. She would earn her place here, not through exhaustion or martyrdom, but through steady, honest work. She would be a good wife to Grant, a good mother to the boys, and a good steward of this land. And maybe, if she was lucky and patient and stubborn enough, she would stop feeling like an intruder in someone else's life and start feeling like she'd finally found her own. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and uncaring. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, indifferent to human hopes and fears. But inside the crooked little house, two boys slept soundly and a tired man dozed in a rocking chair, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Lila Pembroke Holloway wasn't alone. That had to count for something. Sunday morning arrived with church bells that could be heard even 7 miles out, their sound carrying across the prairie like a summons Lila wished she could ignore. She dressed in her second-best dress, the gray one with black trim that made her look respectable if not pretty, and braided her hair with hands that wanted to shake but wouldn't let themselves. Grant appeared in clean clothes that still smelled faintly of lye soap, his hair combed back and his jaw freshly shaved. The boys wore matching shirts that Lila had mended the night before, their faces scrubbed pink and their hair slicked down with water that was already drying into cowlicks. Ready? Grant asked, and Lila wanted to say no, wanted to claim illness or sudden urgent farm business. Anything to avoid walking into that church and facing the stairs she knew were waiting. As I'll ever be, she said instead. The ride into town was quiet, the wagon rattling over familiar ruts, while the boys sat in back, and Grant kept his attention on the road. Lila watched the landscape roll past and tried to prepare herself for what was coming, but there was no real way to armor yourself against judgment. You just had to walk through it and hope you didn't break. Cutter's Ridge looked different on a Sunday morning, cleaner somehow, like the town had put on its best face for the Sabbath. People clustered on the church steps, their Sunday clothes bright against the weathered wood, their voices carrying in the still air. Lila saw heads turn as the Holloway wagon approached, saw the nudges and whispers start like ripples on water. Grant pulled up to the hitching rail and set the brake. "Boys, help your ma down." Samuel jumped down first, then turned to offer Lila his hand with a solemnity that was almost painful. Thomas scrambled down after, positioning himself on her other side like a tiny guard. Grant came around and offered his arm, and Lila took it, feeling the solid strength of him beside her. "Chin up," he murmured. "They're just people. People with opinions. Opinions are like noses. Everybody's got one, and most of them are full of something unpleasant." Despite her nerves, Lila almost laughed. They walked up the church steps together, Grant's family, and Lila felt every eye tracking their progress. The conversations didn't quite stop, but they changed, dropping to whispers that were somehow worse than open talk. The interior of the church was dim and cool, smelling of beeswax and old hymnals. Grant led them to a pew near the middle, not so far back as to seem ashamed, not so far forward as to seem presumptuous. They sat, Lila between Grant and Samuel, and she tried to focus on the simple wooden cross at the front rather than the weight of all those stairs on her back. The Reverend took his place at the pulpit, the same round man who'd married them 2 days ago. His eyes found Lila's across the congregation, and something in his expression softened. He opened his Bible and began to read, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." The sermon was about burden and grace, about casting off the judgments of men and trusting in God's love. Lila wondered if the Reverend had chosen it deliberately, if he'd seen her on that train platform and decided she needed reminding that someone, somewhere, thought she had worth. The words washed over her like cool water, not quite enough to erase her anxiety, but enough to ease it slightly. When they stood for the final hymn, Lila's voice joined the others, finding the melody by memory. Grant didn't sing, just held the hymnal and moved his lips slightly, his baritone silent but present. Thomas sang enthusiastically and off-key. Samuel watched his father and tried to match his restraint, caught between childhood and the man he thought he should be. After the benediction, the congregation began to file out, and Lila braced herself for what would come next. The gauntlet of Sunday sociability, where neighbors asked after each other's health and made plans for barn raisings and quilting bees where newcomers were either welcomed or quietly excluded. They made it as far as the church steps before the first woman approached. She was tall and angular, with a face that suggested she'd never smiled without permission and wasn't about to start now. "Grant Holloway," she said, her voice carrying, "I heard you'd taken a wife." "Mrs. Patterson," Grant's tone was carefully neutral. "This is Lila, my wife." "Lila, this is Mrs. Patterson. Her husband runs the feed store." "How do you do?" Lila said, offering her hand. Mrs. Patterson looked at the offered hand like it might be diseased, then took it briefly, her grip limp and cold. "Quite a whirlwind courtship, I understand." "We saw no reason to wait." "No, I suppose you wouldn't." Mrs. Patterson's gaze traveled slowly down Lila's body and back up, a assessment that felt like being priced at auction. "It must be difficult, coming all this way only to be, well, but I suppose things worked out for the best." "They did," Grant said firmly. "Lila's been a blessing to my household." "I'm sure." Mrs. Patterson's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Well, I hope you'll be very happy. It's so important to be practical about these things, isn't it? Marriage isn't always about romance. Sometimes it's just about necessity." She swept away before Lila could respond, leaving poison in her wake. Lila's face burned, her hands clenched in her skirts, but Grant's grip on her elbow was steady. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't let her see it landed. She called our marriage a necessity. She's a bitter woman married to a bitter man. Her opinion doesn't feed my cattle or raise my sons." Another woman approached, this one younger, with kind eyes and a baby on her hip. "Grant, it's good to see you at service. And this must be your wife?" She smiled at Lila, the expression genuine. "I'm Emma Chen. My mother-in-law runs the boarding house." "Mrs. Chen." Lila found herself smiling back, relief loosening something in her chest. "It's nice to meet you. Please call me Emma. We're neighbors after all, or as close to neighbors as anyone gets out here." She shifted the baby to her other hip. "If you need anything, anything at all, you come find me. The boarding house is always open, and I know how overwhelming it can be starting fresh in a new place." "Thank you. I appreciate that. I mean it. And don't let the gossips get to you. Half of them have forgotten what it's like to be brave enough to change their lives." Emma touched Lila's arm lightly. "You did a brave thing coming here. Don't let anyone make you forget that." She moved on, and Lila felt something unknot inside her. One kind word. That's all it took to make the cruel ones hurt a little less. The boys had wandered off to where other children were playing near the churchyard, their voices high and competitive. Grant kept his hand on Lila's elbow as more people approached, some genuinely welcoming, others barely disguising their curiosity or judgment. The preacher's wife invited them to a church social. The school teacher asked about enrolling the boys. A rancher Grant knew discussed cattle prices and spring planting. And then Victor Hale appeared. He came around the side of the church with two other men, all of them in fine clothes that marked them as town dwellers rather than farmers. Victor looked exactly as he had on the train platform. Handsome in a soft way, with smooth hands and careful hair. The kind of man who'd never known a blister or a sunrise that required waking before dawn. His eyes found Lila and widened slightly, then narrowed when he saw Grant's hand on her arm. He said something to his companions and broke away, walking toward them with the confidence of a man who'd never learned he could be wrong. "Well," Victor said, loud enough to turn heads. "Mrs. Holloway, I presume." Lila felt Grant tense beside her, but his voice stayed level. "Hale." "Holloway." Victor's attention stayed on Lila, his gaze traveling over her body in a way that made her skin crawl. "I heard you'd found yourself a situation. Didn't take long, did it?" "Is there something you need?" Grant asked, his tone dropping toward dangerous. "Just wanted to congratulate the happy couple." Victor's smile was all edges. "Must have been quite a relief for you, Lila, finding someone willing to take you in so quickly, though I suppose beggars can't be choosers." "Watch your mouth," Grant said softly. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking, that she came here expecting one thing and settled for another. That you married her out of, what was it Mrs. Patterson said? Necessity." Victor tilted his head. "Nothing wrong with that, of course. A man needs help on a farm, and she needed somewhere to go. Practical arrangement all around." Samuel had appeared at his father's side, his small face fierce. "You take that back." "Samuel," Grant warned. "No, Pa. He's being mean to Ma." Samuel glared up at Victor with all the fury his 9-year-old body could muster. "You're the one who left her at the station. You're the one who ran away like a coward. She's worth 10 of you." A murmur ran through the watching crowd. Victor's face reddened, his easy confidence cracking. "Now see here, boy." "The boy's right," Lila said, finding her voice. It came out steadier than she'd expected, clear and cold. "You did leave me at that station, Mr. Hale. You took one look at me and decided I wasn't worth your pretty words. And you know what? I'm grateful." Victor blinked. "You're what?" "Grateful. Because if you'd kept your promise, I'd be married to a man who judges people by their bodies instead of their character. I'd be tied to a coward who runs from anything that doesn't match his expectations. Instead, I'm married to a good man, a strong man, a man who knows that worth has nothing to do with appearance." She stepped closer to Victor, looking him dead in the eye. "You did me a favor by leaving, Mr. Hale. The biggest favor anyone's ever done me, so thank you." The watching crowd had gone absolutely silent. Victor's mouth worked, but no sound came out. Grant's hand found Lila's, his fingers threading through hers, warm and solid and real. "We're done here," Grant said. "Boys, get in the wagon." They walked away together, Grant and Lila and the two boys, leaving Victor Hale standing in the churchyard with his mouth still open and his face burning red. Lila's heart hammered in her chest, adrenaline making her hands shake, but she kept her head up and her spine straight until they reached the wagon. Only when they were safely away from town, the church bells fading behind them, did she let herself sag against the wagon seat. "That was terrifying," she said. That was magnificent, Grant corrected. The look on his face when you thanked him? He shook his head, something like admiration in his expression. I don't think anyone's ever spoken to Victor Hale like that. I shouldn't have. I should have been quiet and let it pass. No. Grant's voice was firm. You stood up for yourself. For us. That's exactly what you should have done. From the back of the wagon, Thomas let out a whoop. Did you see how mad he got? His face went all red like a tomato. Thomas, hush, Samuel said, but he was grinning too. Ma was really brave, wasn't she, Pa? She was. Grant glanced at Lila. She is. The praise warmed her more than it should have, settling into the cold places that Victor's words had created. She'd spent so long accepting other people's judgments, letting their cruelty define her worth, that standing up for herself felt foreign and dangerous and absolutely necessary. Saturday came too quickly, bringing with it the promised trip to town for supplies. Lila had hoped Grant might forget or decide it wasn't necessary, but he loaded the wagon after breakfast with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything, then waited while she changed into a clean dress and pinned up her hair. The ride was easier this time, the silence between them comfortable rather than tense. The boys chattered in the back about things they wanted to see in town, the candy store, the livery stable, the general store with its jars of penny candy. Grant let them talk, his attention on the road, but Lila caught him smiling at their enthusiasm. Town was busier on Saturday than it had been on Sunday, the streets full of wagons and horses and people conducting the week's business. Grant pulled up in front of the general store and helped Lila down, then gave each boy a penny with strict instructions not to spend it on foolishness. Define foolishness, Thomas said. Anything that'll make you sick or get you in trouble. That doesn't narrow it down much, Pa. Grant's mouth twitched. Use your judgment. We'll meet back here in an hour. The boys vanished into the store like smoke, and Grant turned to Lila. You want me to come in with you? I can manage. I know you can. I'm asking if you want company. Lila considered this, then nodded. I'd appreciate it. The general store was a cluttered wonderland of goods, bolts of fabric and barrels of flour, tools and tobacco and tinned goods stacked to the ceiling. The proprietor, a round man with impressive mutton chops, looked up from his ledger when they entered. Grant Holloway, as I live and breathe. Haven't seen you in weeks. Been busy, Charlie. Grant gestured to Lila. This is my wife, Lila. Lila, Charlie Morrison runs the best general store in 3 counties. Only general store in 3 counties, Charlie corrected, but he was smiling. He came around the counter and offered Lila his hand. Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Holloway. What can I do for you folks today? Lila pulled out the list she'd written, the paper worn from being folded and refolded. I need seeds, tomatoes, beans, squash, corn if you have it, carrots, onions, potatoes for planting, and some herb starts if you've got them. Charlie whistled low. Planning a serious garden. Planning to eat something besides preserved vegetables come summer. Can't fault you there. Charlie started pulling items from shelves and drawers, setting them on the counter. Here you got that old garden plot cleared out. That's no small task. Sarah had a touch with growing things. That plot hasn't looked right since she passed. I'm hoping to change that, Lila said. I'm sure you will. Charlie added more items to the growing pile. Now, I got some flower seeds too, if you're interested. Nothing fancy, just cosmos and zinnias, but they're cheerful. Sarah always said a garden needed some pretty mixed in with the practical. Lila hesitated, thinking of her dwindling coins, but Grant spoke up. We'll take them, and add some fabric, maybe that blue calico, enough for a dress. And the boys need new shoes. Thomas has worn through his, and Samuel's getting too big for his. Grant, that's too much, Lila protested quietly. It's necessary. His voice was firm. You need a dress that isn't half worn out, and the boys need shoes that fit. We're not destitute, Lila. We can manage the basics. Charlie was already pulling down the calico, measuring it out with practiced efficiency. I'll put it all on your account, Grant. You can settle up at harvest like usual. While Charlie wrapped their purchases, Lila wandered through the store, running her fingers over bolts of fabric and examining the limited selection of ready-made goods. In the back corner, she found a small shelf of books, McGuffey readers, a Bible, some dime novels with lurid covers, and tucked between them, a worn copy of a book on frontier gardening. She picked it up carefully, flipping through pages filled with diagrams and planting schedules and advice on dealing with pests. It cost 35 cents, which was a small fortune when every coin mattered. But the information inside could mean the difference between a successful garden and a failed one. Find something? Grant appeared at her elbow. Just a book, but it's too expensive. Grant took it from her, examined the cover, then carried it to the counter and added it to their pile. We'll take this too. Grant, a craftsman needs tools. A gardener needs information. It's an investment, not an indulgence. He paid Charlie, counting out coins carefully, then gathered up their packages. Come on, let's find the boys before they spend their pennies on something that'll rot their teeth. They found Samuel and Thomas outside the candy store, their pennies gone and their pockets suspiciously bulging. Thomas's face was smeared with chocolate, and Samuel had the satisfied expression of someone who'd made excellent decisions. What'd you buy? Grant asked. Jawbreakers, Thomas said proudly, pulling one from his pocket and holding it up like a trophy. They last forever, so it's like getting more candy for the same price. That's practical thinking, Lila said, earning herself a brilliant smile from Thomas. I got peppermints, Samuel added, and I saved half for later. Also practical. Grant ruffled Samuel's hair, the gesture brief but affectionate. All right, let's head, well, the Holloways. Lila's stomach dropped. She turned to find Victor Hale standing behind them, this time without his companions, his expression harder than it had been at church. He'd been drinking. She could smell it on him, see it in the slight looseness of his movements. Hale, Grant said, his voice going flat. Step aside. I've been thinking about what you said, Lila. Victor moved closer, ignoring Grant entirely. About being grateful I left you. And I realized something. You're right, I should have taken one look at you and known you weren't worth my time. Should have never written those letters, never made those promises. But I felt sorry for you, you understand? Felt bad about the fat spinster sister rotting away in Philadelphia. Grant moved between them, his body language dangerous. Walk away, Hale, right now. Or what? You'll defend her honor? Victor laughed, harsh and mean. She doesn't have any honor left. She married you the same day I left her. What kind of decent woman does that? What kind of... Grant's fist caught Victor square in the jaw, a solid punch that snapped his head back and sent him stumbling into the hitching post. The street went silent, everyone turning to watch. Victor touched his mouth, his fingers coming away bloody, and something ugly crossed his face. You'll regret that, he said thickly. I doubt it. Grant's voice was ice. You insulted my wife. You're lucky one punch is all you got. Your wife. Victor spat blood onto the dirt. You mean your charity case, your mail order reject that you picked up out of pity because you needed someone to cook your meals and warm your bed. This time, it was Lila who moved. She stepped around Grant and stood directly in front of Victor, her hands steady despite the fury building in her chest. I am not a charity case, she said, her voice clear enough to carry. I am not a reject. I am not anyone's pity project. I am Lila Holloway, and I am worth more than a coward like you will ever understand. You judge people by their bodies because you're too shallow to look deeper. You run when things don't match your expectations because you're too weak to handle reality. You're standing here drunk on a Saturday afternoon, making a fool of yourself in the middle of Main Street, and you think I should feel ashamed? She shook her head. The only shame here is yours, Mr. Hale, and it's well-deserved. Victor's face twisted. You don't know what you're talking about. I paid for your passage. I wrote you letters. I made promises. That means you owe me. I owe you nothing. She said, you're done. Grant's hand fell on Lila's shoulder, warm and solid. And if I hear you've been spreading more poison about my wife, if I hear you've so much as mentioned her name in anything but respectful terms, I will come back to town and finish what I started. Are we clear? Victor backed up a step, then another. His bravado was crumbling, leaving behind only a mean, drunk man who'd just been publicly humiliated twice in 1 week. This isn't over. It is, Lila said. It's been over since the moment you left me at that station. You just haven't accepted it yet. They watched him stumble away, his shoulders hunched and his dignity in tatters. The crowd that had gathered began to disperse, people returning to their business with knowing looks and whispered commentary. Charlie Morrison appeared in his store doorway, shaking his head. "That boy's always been more pride than sense," he said. "You all right, Mrs. Holloway?" "I'm fine," Lila said, and realized she meant it. Her hands were steady, her heart rate was already slowing, and the words she'd spoken felt true in a way few things in her life ever had. Grant's hand was still on her shoulder. "Let's go home." The ride back to the homestead was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. The boys sat in back, unusually subdued, their candy forgotten. Grant kept the horses at a steady pace, his jaw tight and his eyes on the road. Lila sat beside him, processing what had happened, what she'd said, what it meant. "I'm sorry," Grant said finally. "For what?" "For hitting him, for making a scene, for—" he gestured vaguely. "All of it." "Don't be." Lila surprised herself with the conviction in her voice. "He insulted your family. He deserved what he got." "Still, I should have controlled my temper. And I should have kept quiet and let it pass. But I didn't, and neither did you, and I'm glad." She looked at him, at his solid profile and the tension in his shoulders. "Thank you for defending me. You defended yourself pretty well, after you threw the first punch." "Well," Grant's mouth quirked. Seemed like the right thing to do at the time. From the back of the wagon, Samuel spoke up quietly. "Is Mr. Hale going to come after us?" "No," Grant said firmly. "But he said it wasn't over. Men like Victor Hale are all bluster. He's not going to ride out 7 miles to bother us. He's just going to nurse his wounded pride and tell anyone who'll listen that we're terrible people." Grant glanced back at his sons. "And that's fine. Because the people who matter know the truth." "Do they?" Samuel asked. It was Lila who answered. "Some do, some don't. Some never will, no matter what we do or say. But that's not our problem to fix, Samuel. Our problem is to live good lives and build something that matters. The rest is just noise." The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt almost like peace. Lila planted her garden in neat rows according to the book Grant had bought her, working in the cool morning hours before the sun turned vicious. The seeds went into dark earth that she'd turned and amended with manure from the barn, each one placed with the careful hope that it would remember how to grow. She watered them daily, checking for the first green shoots with an anticipation that surprised her. Grant worked from dawn until well past dark, mending fences and moving cattle and fixing the 100 small things that broke on a working farm. He was quieter than Samuel, more guarded, but Lila was learning to read him, the set of his shoulders when he was worried about weather, the way his jaw tightened when money got tight, the brief softening around his eyes when the boys made him laugh. They lived like business partners sharing a house, polite and considerate and carefully distant. Grant slept in the rocking chair each night despite Lila's protests, rising before dawn to restart the fire and put coffee on before heading out to tend animals. Lila kept the house clean and the meals regular and the boys' clothes mended, throwing herself into work with a determination that bordered on fierce. The boys warmed to her gradually, like frost melting under spring sun. Thomas was easier. He craved affection and gave it freely, climbing into her lap while she read aloud in the evenings, bringing her wildflowers he'd picked near the creek, chattering about everything and nothing while she worked. Samuel was harder, holding himself back with visible effort, testing her constantly to see if she'd stay, if she'd keep her promises, if she was real or just another loss waiting to happen. One afternoon in late May, Lila was hanging washing when she heard raised voices from the barn. She set down her basket and walked toward the sound, finding Grant and Samuel facing each other with identical stubborn expressions. "I said no," Grant was saying, his voice hard. "But Pa, everyone else gets to go. I don't care what everyone else does. You're needed here." "For what? For more chores? For more work that never ends?" Samuel's voice cracked with frustration. "Jimmy Carson's going fishing with his pa on Sunday. Billy Mitchell's pa is taking him to the county fair, but we never do anything except work. That's because we have a farm to run. Ma used to say we needed to have fun sometimes too. She used to say, 'Your ma isn't here,'" Grant snapped, and the words hung in the air like gun smoke. Samuel's face crumpled, then hardened. "I know she's not here. I know she's dead. You don't have to keep reminding me." He pushed past his father and ran toward the house, his footsteps pounding across the yard. Grant stood very still, his hands clenched at his sides, his head bowed. Lila waited a moment, then approached carefully. "He didn't mean it," she said quietly. "Yeah, he did, and he's right." Grant's voice was rough. "I work them too hard. I forget they're children. I forget that grief doesn't care about fence lines or planting schedules. You're doing the best you can. My best isn't good enough." He turned to look at her, and the exhaustion in his face was profound. Sarah knew how to balance it: work and play, structure and freedom. She knew how to make them feel loved while still teaching them responsibility. "I just know how to keep them fed and clothed and too busy to think about what they've lost." Lila considered this, thinking about the boy who'd run past her with tears on his face and rage in his eyes. What was Samuel asking for? Permission to go fishing on Sunday instead of church. "And you said no because?" "Because we go to church on Sunday. Because that's what we do." "Grant." Lila waited until he met her eyes. "When's the last time you did something just for fun? Just because you wanted to, not because it needed doing?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. Thought. Shook his head. "That's what I thought." She took a breath. "What if we went fishing? All of us. Skip church this week, take the boys to wherever has good fishing, spend the day just being a family." "We can't skip church. People already talk." "Let them talk. They're going to talk regardless. But Samuel needs his father to remember he's more than another pair of hands for farm work. And Thomas needs to see his brother smile again. And you—" She reached out and touched his arm lightly. "You need to remember what it feels like to rest." Grant looked at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. "You're supposed to be on my side." "I am on your side. That's why I'm telling you the truth instead of what you want to hear." Well, something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or respect. "You're bossy, you know that?" "I prefer direct." Sarah was direct. "You're bossy." But there was no heat in it, and the corner of his mouth was trying not to smile. "Fine, I'm bossy. Are we going fishing or not?" Grant was quiet for a long moment, looking toward the house where Samuel had disappeared. Finally, he nodded. "Sunday. Early, before it gets hot. There's a good spot about 3 miles south where the creek widens out. I'll pack food." "Lila?" He caught her hand before she could walk away. "Thank you. For being bossy. For caring about them. About us." He released her hand. "I know this isn't what you signed up for." "Neither is it what you signed up for," she said gently, "but we're making it work anyway." She found Samuel in the loft, lying on his narrow bed and staring at the ceiling. She climbed the ladder slowly, giving him time to wipe his face, then sat on Thomas's empty bed across from him. "Your pa says we're going fishing on Sunday," she said. Samuel turned his head to look at her, suspicious. "Really?" "Really. Early morning, before the heat sets in. We'll pack a lunch and make a day of it. Pa never skips church." "He's making an exception." Samuel sat up slowly, studying her face. "You talked him into it." "I suggested it. He made the decision." "Why'd you do that?" Lila considered how to answer. "Because you were right. Work is important, but it's not the only thing that matters. And because I think your pa forgets sometimes that he's allowed to enjoy his life, not just survive it." "He's been different since Ma died," Samuel said quietly. "Harder. Like he's afraid if he stops working for even a minute, everything will fall apart. Maybe it's time we show him that's not true." "You think fishing will fix that?" "No, but it's a start." Samuel looked at her for a long moment, something complicated working behind his eyes. "You're not so bad, you know. For someone who's not really our ma." "I'm not trying to replace her, Samuel. I couldn't even if I wanted to." "I know, but you're here, and you're trying, and that's—" He shrugged, not quite able to finish the thought. "That's something." It wasn't quite acceptance, but it was close enough to make Lila's throat tight. "Get washed up for supper. I made stew." Sunday morning arrived clear and cool, perfect for fishing. They loaded the wagon with poles Grant dug out from the barn, a bucket for catching, and a basket of food Lila had packed the night before: cold chicken, biscuits, early strawberries from the wild patch near the garden, a jar of lemonade. The boys were practically vibrating with excitement, talking over each other about the fish they'd catch and how big they'd be. The spot Grant had mentioned was everything he'd promised. A wide bend in the creek where the water ran deep and slow, shaded by cottonwoods and surrounded by grass that was still green despite the approaching summer heat. Grant showed the boys how to bait their hooks with worms they'd dug that morning, how to cast without tangling their lines, how to be patient and wait for the fish to bite. Lila sat under a tree and watched them, her sewing forgotten in her lap. There was something about seeing Grant with his sons, his voice patient as he corrected Thomas's grip or praised Samuel's cast, that made her chest ache with complicated feelings she wasn't ready to examine. This was what family looked like. Not perfect, not easy, but real and present and trying. Thomas caught the first fish, a small sunfish that fought like it was 10 times its size. His whoop of triumph scattered birds from the trees and brought Grant over to help him land it. They examined it together, Grant's large hands gentle as he showed Thomas how to remove the hook, then let the fish go with a splash that made Thomas laugh. "Why'd we let it go if we caught it?" Thomas demanded. "Because it's too small to eat and too pretty to kill," Grant said. "We'll catch bigger ones." And they did. By noon, they had half a dozen decent-sized fish in the bucket, enough for supper with some to spare. Grant built a small fire and they ate lunch in the shade, the boys chattering about their catches while Lila poured lemonade and Grant leaned against a tree with his eyes half closed, more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. After lunch, the boys went wading in the shallows, their pants rolled up and their voices high with delight. Grant stayed by the fire, poking at the coals with a stick. "This was a good idea," he said. "You sound surprised." "I am. I'd forgotten what it felt like to just stop." He glanced at her. "You should come fishing too, not just sit and watch." "I don't know how." "I'll teach you." It was that simple. Grant found her a pole, showed her how to bait the hook without squeamishness, taught her how to cast with a smooth motion that sent the line sailing out over the water. She was clumsy at first, tangling her line and losing her bait, but Grant was patient, standing close behind her to guide her arms through the motion, his hands warm on her wrists. "Like this," he said, his voice close to her ear. "Smooth. Don't force it." She tried again, and this time the line flew straight, landing with a gentle plop in a promising-looking pool. They stood together waiting, Grant still close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, and something in the moment felt significant, like they were crossing some invisible line they'd both been carefully avoiding. "Grant," she said quietly. "Yeah? When you married me, did you mean it? About wanting partnership, not just convenience?" He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "I meant it. I still mean it. But I didn't think it was fair to ask for more than what we agreed to. You married me because you needed somewhere to go, not because you wanted—" He stopped, searching for words. "Not because you wanted me." "I married you because you offered me something real," Lila said, "and because you looked at me like I was a person, not a problem. That meant more than you know." "It should have been easy," Grant said, "keeping it simple, practical. But you make it hard." "Hard how?" "You work yourself half to death trying to prove something that doesn't need proving. You stand up to men like Victor Hale without flinching. You care about my boys like they're yours. You're bossy and stubborn, and you make me remember what it feels like to have someone in my corner." He turned to look at her directly. "You make me want things I gave up hoping for." Lila's breath caught. "What kind of things?" "A real marriage, a real partner, someone to talk to at the end of the day who actually understands what I'm saying." His jaw tightened. "Someone to—" Her fishing line jerked hard, nearly pulling the pole from her hands. Grant grabbed it, helping her hold on as something substantial fought on the other end. "Pull," he shouted. "Keep the tip up." She pulled, her arms straining, Grant's hands over hers on the pole as they fought the fish together. The boys came running from the creek, yelling encouragement. The line sang with tension. And then the fish broke the surface. A beautiful bass, easily 2 pounds, thrashing silver in the sunlight. They landed it together, Grant grabbing it behind the gills while Lila held the pole, both of them breathing hard and grinning like fools. Thomas danced in circles. Samuel let out a rebel yell. And for one perfect moment, they were just a family celebrating something simple and good. "I guess fishing's not so hard after all," Lila said, still breathless. "Not when you've got the right teacher," Grant said, and there was something in his eyes that had nothing to do with fishing. They stayed until the sun started lowering, until the boys were waterlogged and tired, and the bucket was full of fish. The ride home was quiet, the boys dozing in the wagon bed, Grant and Lila side by side on the bench seat. Somewhere along the way, his hand found hers, their fingers tangling together like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Thank you for today," he said. "You already thanked me." "I'm thanking you again for reminding me that life's supposed to have some joy in it." Lila squeezed his hand. "You're welcome." The peaceful weeks that followed felt like borrowed time, too good to last. The garden flourished under Lila's care, green shoots pushing through the earth exactly like the book said they would. The boys finished their school year with decent marks and immediately turned feral, running wild across the prairie and coming home filthy and happy. Grant worked his way through the endless list of farm tasks with slightly less grimness, occasionally taking breaks to show Lila how to milk the cow properly or explain his plans for expanding the herd. They were becoming a family, slowly and carefully, like a broken bone knitting itself back together. Grant still slept in the rocking chair, but now he sometimes fell asleep mid-conversation with Lila, his voice trailing off as exhaustion claimed him. She'd cover him with a blanket and go to bed alone, her feelings more tangled than she wanted to admit. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning in mid-June, delivered by a rider who barely stopped long enough to hand it over before continuing on his route. Grant opened it at the kitchen table while Lila kneaded bread, his expression darkening as he read. "What is it?" she asked. "Victor Hale." Grant's voice was flat. "He's filed a claim against me with the territorial court." "A claim for what?" "For you." Grant looked up, and there was something dangerous in his eyes. "He's saying I stole his intended bride, that he paid for your passage, and you're contractually obligated to marry him. He's demanding either that the marriage be annulled or that I reimburse him for your train ticket plus damages for emotional suffering." Lila's hand stilled in the dough. "That's insane." "That's Victor Hale." Grant set the letter down carefully, like it might explode. "The hearing's in 2 weeks. We'll need to go to Cheyenne, present our case, prove that you married me of your own free will." "Of course I married you of my own free will. He abandoned me at the station." "His letter claims he went to get his wagon, and when he came back, you were gone. That I convinced you to marry me before he could explain himself." Grant's jaw was tight. "It's all lies, but it's legal enough that we have to answer it. This is because of what happened in town, because you hit him. This is because he's a spoiled child who can't stand that you chose someone else." Grant stood, pacing to the window. "I should have hit him harder." Despite everything, Lila almost smiled. "Violence isn't the answer." "Sometimes it's a pretty good question, though." They had 2 weeks to prepare their defense, 2 weeks to gather evidence and testimonies that would prove their marriage was legitimate and Victor's claim was nonsense. The station clerk agreed to testify about Victor's absence in Grant's proposal. The Reverend wrote a letter confirming the marriage was conducted properly with no signs of coercion. Charlie Morrison signed a statement saying Grant had never mentioned wanting a wife until the day Lila arrived. But the strongest evidence was Lila's letters from Victor, all of them, tied with kitchen twine and stored in her trunk. She read through them with Grant, both of them analyzing the promises he'd made, the plans he'd suggested, the complete absence of any contractual language that would give him legal claim to her. "These are love letters," Grant said, handling them carefully. "Not a business arrangement." He's going to say the passage money was a contract. Passage money's a gift unless there's specific terms attached, and gifts don't come with obligations. Grant set the letters aside. "We'll be fine. The judge will see this for what it is, a rich man throwing a tantrum." But Lila couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than Victor's wounded pride. This was about control, about a man who couldn't accept that something he wanted had chosen differently. This was dangerous in ways that went beyond legal proceedings. The night before they were due to leave for Cheyenne, Lila couldn't sleep. She sat on the porch in Sarah's old rocking chair, wrapped in a shawl against the cool night air, watching stars wheel overhead. The door opened quietly, and Grant emerged, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Figured you might want company, he said, offering her a cup. Can't stop thinking about tomorrow. Me either. Grant sat on the porch steps, his back against the rail. I keep trying to figure out what else we need, what we might have missed. We have everything. Witnesses, letters, the marriage certificate. We have the truth. Truth doesn't always win. I know. Lila sipped her coffee, the bitter heat of it centering. Grant? If the judge rules in Victor's favor, if he annuls the marriage, what happens to me? Grant's voice was fierce. That's not going to happen. But if it does, it won't. He turned to look at her, his expression hard in the moonlight. I'll fight it every way I know how. I'll appeal to every court between here and Washington if I have to. You're my wife, Lila. You're the boy's mother. You're part of this family, and I don't give up what's mine without a fight. What's yours? Lila repeated softly, and something in her chest went warm. That came out wrong. No. She set down her coffee cup. It came out exactly right. I am yours, and you're mine, and tomorrow we're going to walk into that courtroom and prove it to anyone who doubts. Grant climbed the steps and stood in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to see his face. When did you get so brave? When I had something worth being brave for. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his calloused palm. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, gentle despite the roughness of his hands. I should have said this before, he said quietly. Should have said it weeks ago. But I'm saying it now. This marriage, it stopped being convenient about the time you told Victor Hale to his face that you were grateful he'd left you. It stopped being practical when you convinced me to go fishing. It stopped being just an arrangement when I started looking forward to seeing you at breakfast more than I looked forward to the breakfast itself. Grant, let me finish. His voice was rough. I don't know when it happened exactly. Maybe that first day on the station platform when you refused to cry. Maybe when you stood up to Mrs. Patterson at church. Maybe it was watching you with the boys, or working yourself bloody in the garden, or just being there every single day like you promised. But somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking of you as my convenient wife and started thinking of you as just my wife. The person I want to talk to and work beside and build a life with. And I know I've got no right to ask for more than what we agreed to, but I'm asking anyway. I'm asking if there's any chance you might feel the same. Lila's breath caught in her throat. She thought about the past weeks, the small kindnesses and shared silences, the way her heart jumped when she heard his voice in the morning, the way she'd started thinking of this crooked little house as home, not because of the walls, but because of the man who lived in them. You stubborn fool, she said, her voice shaking. Of course I feel the same. I've been falling in love with you since you taught me to fish. Maybe even before that. Maybe since you offered me your name without asking for anything in return. Grant made a sound somewhere between a laugh and something more desperate. Say that again. Which part? The part about falling in love with me. I'm falling in love with you, Grant Holloway. Probably have been for weeks. I just didn't think I was allowed to hope you might feel the same. He kissed her then, leaning down to capture her mouth with his. The kiss tender and fierce, and full of all the words they'd been holding back. Lila's hands came up to his shoulders, steadying herself against the intensity of it, and kissed him back with everything she had. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grant rested his forehead against hers. Tomorrow, he said, we face Victor Hale and whatever nonsense he's trying to pull, and then we come home and we figure out what this marriage looks like when it's real. All of it. No more me sleeping in that damn rocking chair. No more pretending this is just an arrangement. Deal? Deal, Lila whispered. Good. He kissed her again, quicker this time. Now go to bed and try to sleep. We've got a long day tomorrow. But neither of them slept much that night, both too wired with anticipation and worry to rest. By the time dawn broke, they were already loading the wagon, the boys still rubbing sleep from their eyes but excited about the journey to the city. The ride to Cheyenne took most of the day, the landscape changing from open prairie to scattered settlements to the outskirts of actual civilization. The territorial courthouse was an imposing building of red brick and white columns, standing proud among smaller wooden structures. Grant pulled the wagon up in front of it and helped Lila down, his hand lingering on hers. Ready? He asked. No, but I'm doing it anyway. They climbed the courthouse steps together, the boys trailing behind, and walked into whatever came next with their heads high and their hands clasped tight. The courtroom was smaller than Lila had imagined, with wooden benches worn smooth by decades of anxious bodies and windows that let in slanted morning light. A clerk sat at a desk near the front, shuffling papers with the bored efficiency of someone who'd seen every possible human drama play out in this room. The judge's bench loomed empty, waiting. Victor Hale was already there, sitting at one of the tables with a lawyer in a fine suit that probably cost more than Grant made in a year. Victor looked different than he had in Cutter's Ridge, cleaner, more polished, wearing respectability like armor. When he saw Lila, something cold flickered across his face before settling into an expression of wounded nobility. Grant led them to the opposite table, settling Lila in a chair before taking the seat beside her. The boys sat in the front bench directly behind them, Samuel's face serious and Thomas's eyes wide with the drama of it all. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Nathaniel Carr," the clerk announced, and everyone stood as the judge entered. A gray-haired man with a weathered face and eyes that suggested he'd already heard every lie the human tongue could produce. Judge Carr settled into his chair with a sigh that spoke of long days and longer careers. "Let's begin. Case of Hale versus Holloway, regarding the validity of a marriage contract and claims of monetary damages. Mr. Thornton, you're representing the plaintiff?" Victor's lawyer stood smooth as oil. "Yes, Your Honor. Theodore Thornton, representing Mr. Victor Hale in this matter of broken contract and emotional damages." "And the defense?" Grant stood. "Representing myself and my wife, Your Honor, Grant Holloway." Judge Carr's eyebrows rose slightly. "You're not represented by counsel, Mr. Holloway?" "Can't afford it, Your Honor, but I've got the truth on my side, and I figure that ought to count for something. Truth is helpful, but the law can be complicated. You're certain you don't want to request a continuance to obtain representation?" "I'm certain, Your Honor. My wife and I have done nothing wrong, and I'm prepared to prove it today." The judge looked between them, something like approval in his expression. "Very well. Mr. Thornton, present your case." Thornton stood and launched into a speech that was part legal argument and part theatrical performance. He painted Victor as a wrong gentleman who'd entered into a good faith arrangement with Lila Pembroke, paying her substantial travel expenses with the understanding that they would marry. He described Victor's temporary absence from the train station as a simple errand to prepare for his bride's arrival, and his return to find her gone as a betrayal orchestrated by Grant Holloway, who had taken advantage of a vulnerable woman's confusion. "Mr. Hale extended kindness and generosity to Miss Pembroke," Thornton said, his voice ringing with practiced outrage. "He opened his heart and his wallet to bring her west, only to have another man swoop in like a vulture and steal what was rightfully his. This isn't just about money, Your Honor, though my client is owed reimbursement for expenses incurred. This is about honor, about the sanctity of promises made between a man and a woman." Lila's hands clenched in her lap. Grant reached over and covered them with one of his, steady and warm. Thornton called Victor to the stand first. Victor swore his oath and settled into the witness chair with the air of a man performing a role he'd rehearsed extensively. "Mr. Hale," Thornton began, "please describe for the court how you came to know Miss Pembroke." "I placed an advertisement seeking a wife," Victor said, his voice measured and reasonable. "Someone kind and educated who wanted to build a life out west." Miss Pembroke responded with a letter that was thoughtful and sincere. "We corresponded for 6 months, and I grew quite fond of her through our letters." "And you agreed to pay her passage west?" "I did. Nearly $60, which was a substantial sum, but I felt it was my responsibility as her intended husband." "What happened when she arrived in Cutter's Ridge?" Victor's expression became pained, like he was reliving a terrible memory. "I went to meet her train, but there was some confusion at the station. I stepped away briefly to arrange for transport of her trunk, and when I returned she was gone. I searched the station, the surrounding area, but she'd vanished. I later learned that Mr. Holloway had convinced her to marry him that very afternoon." "How did that make you feel?" Grant made a sound of disgust, and Judge Carr shot him a warning look. "Devastated," Victor said. "I'd spent months building a relationship with this woman, investing not just money, but genuine emotion. To have it end so abruptly, to be cast aside without even a conversation, it was deeply painful. No further questions, Thornton said, returning to his seat with the satisfaction of a man who delivered exactly what he intended. Judge Carr looked at Grant. Mr. Holloway, do you wish to cross-examine? Grant stood, and Lila could see the tension in his shoulders. I do, Your Honor. He approached the witness stand, and Victor watched him with barely concealed contempt. Mr. Hale, Grant began, you said you stepped away briefly at the station. How long is briefly? Perhaps 15 minutes. And in those 15 minutes, you arranged transport for a trunk? I went to hire a wagon. The livery stable's a quarter-mile from the train station. That's a half-mile round trip plus time to conduct business. 15 minutes seems optimistic. Victor's jaw tightened. Perhaps it was 20 minutes. I wasn't timing myself. Fair enough. And when you returned to the station and found Miss Pembroke gone, what did you do? I searched for her, as I said. Did you ask the station clerk where she'd gone? A pause. I may have. You may have, or you did. I don't recall exactly. Grant pulled a paper from his pocket. I have a statement here from Pete Henderson, the station clerk. He states that you never asked him about Miss Pembroke's whereabouts, that you looked around briefly, then left. Does that sound accurate? I was distraught. Perhaps I wasn't thinking clearly. Or perhaps you saw Miss Pembroke waiting on that platform, saw that she didn't match whatever image you'd built up in your head, and decided you didn't want her after all. Objection! Thornton was on his feet. Speculation, Your Honor. Sustained, Judge Carr said. Mr. Holloway, stick to facts. Grant nodded. Mr. Hale, in your letters to Miss Pembroke, did you ever specify that the train ticket constituted a binding contract? The implication was clear. I'm asking about specific language. Did you ever write the words contract or obligation or agreement? Victor shifted in his seat. The arrangement was understood between us. That's not an answer. Did you or did you not use contractual language in your correspondence? No, but no further questions. Grant returned to his seat, and Lila saw the slight tremor in his hands that he was trying to hide. Thornton called several character witnesses for Victor, men from town who spoke glowingly about his reputation and business dealings, women who described him as a gentleman of standing. But when Grant cross-examined them, asking if they'd ever read his letters to Lila or witnessed his behavior at the train station, none of them could offer anything beyond hearsay and supposition. Finally, Thornton rested his case, and Judge Carr turned to Grant. Mr. Holloway, you may present your defense. Grant stood. Your Honor, I'd like to call my wife to the stand. Lila's heart jumped into her throat, but she stood and walked to the witness chair on legs that felt like they might give out. The clerk administered the oath, and she swore to tell the truth, though her voice shook slightly on the words. Grant approached her gently, like he was talking to a spooked horse. Mrs. Holloway, can you describe what happened when you arrived at the Cutter's Ridge train station? Lila took a breath and told the truth, all of it. She described stepping off the train full of hope, scanning the platform for the man whose letters she'd treasured. She described seeing Victor's face change when he spotted her, the way his welcoming expression had crumbled into something close to disgust. She described standing there for over an hour, her trunk at her feet, watching him walk away and never return. Did he speak to you at all? Grant asked. Briefly. He said, "Oh, and I see." Then he said he needed to check on something and would return shortly. He never did. And then what happened? You arrived with your boys, you asked the station clerk about your sister-in-law, and when you learned she wasn't on the train, you noticed me standing there. You asked if I was waiting for Mr. Hale, and I confirmed I was. You told me he wasn't coming. And I proposed marriage right then? Not immediately. First you suggested the boarding house. You told me about Mrs. Chen's place, about possible work in town. It was only when I said I'd come to build a life, not just to survive, that you made your offer. Did I coerce you in any way? No, you were direct and honest. You told me you needed help on your farm, and I needed a home. You promised respect and a roof and 3 meals. You never pretended it was about romance. But you said yes. I said yes because it was the only real offer I'd received that day. Because you looked at me like I was a person instead of a disappointment. Because I was tired of being judged by my appearance instead of my character. Her voice strengthened. I said yes because I chose to, Mr. Holloway. Nobody forced me. Nobody tricked me. I made a free choice, and I've never regretted it. Grant's expression softened. No further questions, Your Honor. Thornton stood for cross-examination, circling Lila like a shark. Mrs. Holloway, isn't it true that you were desperate when Mr. Holloway found you? I was stranded, Lila corrected. There's a difference. Desperate enough to marry a complete stranger within hours of being abandoned? I married a man who offered me honesty and partnership. That's not desperation. That's practicality. A man who just happened to appear at the perfect moment to steal you away from my client? Your client stole himself away when he walked off that platform and never came back. Lila's voice was steady now, the fear burned away by anger. I wasn't property to be stolen, Mr. Thornton. I was a woman making a choice between a man who judged me by my body and a man who judged me by my character. I chose character. Thornton's mouth thinned. Your Honor, this witness is being argumentative. This witness is answering your questions honestly, Judge Carr interrupted. Continue, Mr. Thornton, or sit down. Thornton tried several more approaches, attempting to paint Lila as confused or manipulated, but she held firm, answering each question with the simple truth. Finally, he gave up and returned to his seat, frustration evident in every line of his body. Grant called the station clerk next, who testified that Victor had indeed been absent from the platform for well over an hour, that he'd seen him leave and not return, and that Lila had stood waiting the entire time with a dignity that had impressed him. He confirmed that Grant's proposal had been witnessed by several people, and that Lila had appeared to be making her own decision freely. The Reverend's letter was entered into evidence, stating that the marriage ceremony had been conducted properly and that both parties had appeared to consent willingly. Charlie Morrison's statement confirmed that Grant had never mentioned wanting a wife until that specific day, eliminating any suggestion of premeditation. Finally, Grant entered Victor's letters into evidence, all 36 of them, tied with that kitchen twine and worn from reading. Judge Carr examined them carefully, his expression growing more skeptical with each page. These are love letters, the judge said finally, romantic correspondence between two people exploring a potential relationship. There's no contractual language anywhere in these documents, no terms and conditions, no binding agreement. Mr. Thornton, your client paid for a train ticket as a gift, not as a purchase. Your Honor, the implied understanding, the only thing implied here is that your client made promises he had no intention of keeping the moment reality didn't match his expectations. Judge Carr set the letters aside. Mr. Holloway, do you have anything else to present? Just one more thing, Your Honor. Grant stood. I'd like to enter into evidence proof that our marriage is real and valid. He pulled out their marriage certificate, the official document signed by the Reverend and witnessed by the station clerk and his wife. We've been married for 7 weeks now. My wife has made a home for my sons and me. She's planted a garden and keeps our house and has become part of our family in every way that matters. This isn't a sham marriage or a trick. It's real. Judge Carr examined the certificate, then looked at Lila and Grant with eyes that had seen through countless deceptions. Mrs. Holloway, one more question. Yes, Your Honor? If I were to annul this marriage today, what would you do? Lila didn't hesitate. I'd ask Mr. Holloway to marry me again, tomorrow, if he'd have me. Because I love him and his boys, and they're my family now. Not because I'm desperate or confused or coerced, but because I choose them. Every single day I choose them. The judge's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Mr. Hale, stand up. Victor stood, confusion and hope warring on his face. Mr. Hale, I've listened to your case and I've examined the evidence. And I'm going to tell you something my father told me when I was about your age and acting like a fool over a woman who'd turned me down. Judge Carr leaned forward. You can't buy love, you can't contract for it, and you certainly can't sue your way into it. Mrs. Holloway made her choice, and that choice was legal, valid, and final the moment she said, I do, to Grant Holloway. Your claim has no merit in law or in common sense. Your Honor, Thornton began, I'm not finished. The judge's voice cut through the protest. Mr. Hale, you paid for a train ticket for a woman you claimed to care about. That was your choice. She didn't sign a promissory note. She didn't agree to terms and conditions. She simply accepted your gift and came west hoping to build a life with you. When you rejected her based on her appearance, you released any claim you might have had to her company or her affection. You don't get to change your mind 6 weeks later just because she found happiness elsewhere. She humiliated me, Victor said, his voice tight. She married another man the same day I was supposed to marry her. You humiliated yourself by walking away from someone who came all that way to meet you. The real humiliation here is that you're standing in my courtroom trying to use the law to undo your own poor judgment. Judge Carr picked up his gavel. I find for the defendants. The marriage between Grant and Lila Holloway is valid and shall remain so. Mr. Hale's claim for reimbursement is denied. Mr. Hale's claim for damages is denied. Furthermore, Mr. Hale is ordered to cease and desist from any further harassment of the Holloway family, verbal or otherwise, on penalty of contempt. This case is dismissed. The gavel came down with a crack that seemed to echo forever. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Thomas let out a whoop from the front bench, and Samuel was grinning so wide his face looked like it might split. Grant's hand found Lila's, their fingers tangling together as relief washed through them both. Victor stood frozen, his face cycling through shock and rage, and something that might have been shame. Thornton was already packing his briefcase, clearly ready to be done with a case he'd probably known was weak from the start. Mr. and Mrs. Holloway, Judge Carr said as they stood to leave, I wish you both happiness. You've clearly found something worth fighting for. Don't let it go. We won't, Your Honor, Grant said. Thank you. They walked out of that courtroom into bright afternoon sunshine, the boys racing ahead and whooping with joy while Grant and Lila followed more slowly, still processing what had just happened. It's over, Lila said, like she couldn't quite believe it. It's over, Grant confirmed. You're stuck with me now, legal and everything. Stuck with you, she repeated, and then she was laughing, the sound bright and free and full of relief. I suppose there are worse things. Name one. Being married to Victor Hale. Mom, Grant laughed, pulling her close right there on the courthouse steps, not caring who saw. Good point. Come on, let's go home. But before they could reach the wagon, Victor appeared, stepping out from the shadow of the building. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, his fine clothes unable to hide the defeat in his posture. Lila, he said, can I talk to you, just for a moment? Grant tensed, but Lila touched his arm. It's all right. I'll hear him out. I'll be right here, Grant said, moving a few feet away but keeping his eyes on Victor. Victor looked at her for a long moment, something complicated working behind his expression. I expected you to fail, he said finally. When I heard you'd married Holloway, I thought you'd be miserable within a month. I thought you'd realize what a mistake you'd made, choosing a dirt farmer over me. I thought... He stopped, shaking his head. I thought you'd come crawling back, proving I'd been right to leave you. I know, Lila said quietly. But you didn't fail. You flourished, and that made me angrier than anything else because it meant I'd been wrong. Not just about you, but about everything, about what matters, about what makes a person worthy. He looked down at his hands. I'm not apologizing. I don't think I'm capable of that level of honesty yet, but I wanted you to know that I see it now. I see what I missed, what I was too shallow to recognize when I had the chance. Thank you for saying that. For what it's worth, Holloway's a lucky man, luckier than he probably knows. Oh, I think he knows, Lila said. He's smarter than you gave him credit for. Smarter than you, certainly. Victor's mouth twisted in something that wasn't quite a smile. That's fair. He looked past her to where Grant waited, protective and solid. Take care of her, Holloway. She's worth more than either of us deserved. I know, Grant said simply. Victor nodded once, then walked away, his shoulders hunched and his fine clothes unable to hide the fact that he was leaving alone while they were leaving together. Grant came back to Lila's side, wrapping an arm around her waist. You all right? I'm fine. Better than fine. She leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of him against her side. I'm free. The ride home took most of the evening, the sunset painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber and deep purple. The boys dozed in the wagon bed, exhausted from the excitement. Grant drove with one hand, the other holding Lila's, their fingers intertwined like a promise. So, he said as the homestead came into view. About that conversation we had last night. About you sleeping in the rocking chair? About a lot of things, but yes, that too. Lila's heart picked up speed. What about it? I meant what I said, all of it. I love you, Lila Holloway. I love your stubborn practicality and your fierce loyalty and the way you refuse to let anyone make you feel less than you are. I love watching you with the boys and seeing you bring life back to this farm. I love... He stopped, searching for words. I love who I am when I'm with you. You make me want to be better, softer, more present. You make me remember that life's supposed to have joy in it, not just survival. Grant, let me finish. I know this started as a convenient arrangement. I know you married me because you needed somewhere to go and I needed help on the farm. But it's not that anymore. Hasn't been for a while. And I'm tired of pretending otherwise. So I'm asking, really asking, if you'd be willing to make this marriage real. All the way real. Not just on paper, but in every way that matters. Lila looked at him. At this man who'd offered her dignity when everyone else had offered pity. Who'd defended her honor and built her up and given her a place to belong. She thought about the past weeks. The slow building of trust and partnership. The moment on the creek bank when she'd realized she was falling in love with him. She thought about standing in that courtroom and declaring that she'd choose him again and again, and meaning every word. Grant Holloway, she said, her voice steady and sure. I married you 7 weeks ago because I was practical and desperate and brave enough to take a chance on a stranger. But I'd marry you again today for completely different reasons. I'd marry you because you're kind and honorable and you work harder than any man I've ever known. I'd marry you because you taught me to fish and you listen when I talk and you treat me like I matter. I'd marry you because I love you with everything I have and everything I am. So yes, let's make this marriage real, all the way real. Grant pulled the wagon to a stop right there in the yard, set the brake, and turned to her. I want to do this right. Court you proper, the way I should have from the beginning. We're already married, Grant. I think we can skip the courting. I'm going to court you anyway. Take you dancing in town, bring you flowers from the prairie, write you terrible poetry that'll make you laugh. You can't write poetry. Exactly. It's going to be awful. You'll love it. Lila laughed, the sound bright and free in the evening air. You're ridiculous. I'm in love. There's a difference. He leaned in and kissed her, tender and thorough, tasting of coffee and promise and home. Behind them, Thomas made a gagging sound. Gross. Pa's kissing Ma. About time, Samuel said, sounding satisfied. Grant broke the kiss, grinning. All right, you two, into the house. Time for bed. But Pa, we want to hear more about the trial. Tomorrow, tonight, you sleep. And your Ma and I are going to sit on this porch and talk about grown-up things that are none of your business. The boys grumbled but obeyed, climbing down from the wagon and trudging toward the house with the heavy-footed dramatics of children who knew they were being dismissed but weren't quite brave enough to argue. When they disappeared inside, Grant helped Lila down from the wagon, his hands lingering on her waist. Should we go in? She asked. Eventually. He led her to the porch steps, and they sat together in the spot where they'd had so many conversations, his arm around her shoulders and her head resting against his chest. Above them, stars began appearing one by one, pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. I keep thinking about what the judge said, Lila murmured, about not letting this go. We won't. How can you be sure? Life's hard out here. Drought, illness, bad luck, any of those things could break us. They could, Grant agreed, but we'll face them together. That's what makes the difference. I survived losing Sarah, barely, because I had to. But with you, he tightened his arm around her. With you, I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm living, and I'll be damned if I let anything take that away from us. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the night settle in around them. From inside the house came the sound of the boys moving around upstairs, their voices a low murmur. The prairie breathed around them, vast and dark and full of possibility. Grant, Lila said finally, thank you for seeing me that day at the station, for looking past what Victor Hale saw and recognizing something worth keeping. Lila, honey, Victor Hale's a fool. You were always worth keeping. You were always worth everything. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Besides, I should be thanking you. You came into my life and reminded me what it felt like to hope for tomorrow instead of just dreading it. You gave my boys their smiles back. You made this house a home again." "We made it a home," she corrected. "Together." "Together," he agreed. Later, much later, when the boys were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Grant took Lila's hand and led her inside. They stood in the main room, the same space where she'd first entered as his convenient bride 7 weeks ago, and everything looked different now. The rocking chair that had been Grant's bed was pushed against the wall. The bedroom door stood open, welcoming instead of forbidden. "Last chance to change your mind," Grant said, though his tone suggested he was joking. "Not a chance, Mr. Holloway. You're stuck with me now, legal and everything, remember?" "Best mistake I ever made," he said, and kissed her again, deeper this time, full of promise and heat, and the certainty that this was exactly where they both belonged. The prairie stretched endlessly around their little homestead, indifferent to human joy or sorrow. But inside the crooked house with its patched walls and worn floors, two people who'd started as strangers had become partners, had become friends, had become something that looked remarkably like destiny. And in the morning, they would wake up together and face whatever came next with the confidence of people who'd chosen each other not once, but over and over again every single day. The garden would grow, the boys would flourish, the seasons would turn and turn again, bringing hardship and harvest in equal measure. But through all of it, they would have this, the knowledge that love wasn't something you found perfectly formed. It was something you built, carefully and patiently, from broken pieces and second chances and the stubborn refusal to give up on something worth having. Lila Pembroke had gotten on a train looking for a life that would finally see her worth. She'd found it in the most unexpected place, in a widower farmer's honest proposal, in two boys' tentative trust, in a crooked house on the prairie where dignity mattered more than appearance and character counted more than convenience. She'd come west as a mail-order bride that nobody wanted. She was staying as Lila Holloway, wife, mother, gardener, fighter, and the beating heart of a home built on second chances and love that grew slowly but rooted deep. And that, she thought, as Grant's arms tightened around her and she heard him whisper her name like a prayer, was more than enough. It was everything. Outside, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. Inside, a family slept peacefully, complete and whole. And somewhere in between, the prairie kept its secrets and witnessed another small miracle. Two broken people who'd found each other at exactly the right moment and built something beautiful from the pieces they had left. The end wasn't perfect or fairy tale simple, but it was real. And real, they'd both learned, was worth more than any pretty promise ever could be.